Lyra Voss did not mean to fall asleep. She had told herself, very firmly, that she would stay awake for the whole journey. She had a list of things to review. She had notes to organize. She had a small leather journal with a cracked spine that held 6 months of survey corrections, and she had planned to spend the 4-hour ride from Dunmore to the Provincial Archive going through every single page. She lasted 40 minutes. The carriage was warm. The roads through the Northern Territory were smoother than anything she had traveled in years. Someone had lined the seat with a dark wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar, and Lyra, who had not slept properly in longer than she could honestly remember, had simply stopped fighting it. She did not hear the convoy slow. She did not hear the guards exchange words at the checkpoint. She did not hear the door on the other side of the carriage open, or the sound of boots on stone, or the very particular silence that fell over a crowd of trained soldiers when something happened that none of their training had prepared them for. She was asleep. Her journal had slid off her lap. Her head had tipped sideways against the window frame. There was a faint ink stain on her left cheek from a pen she had not properly capped. She looked, one of the guards would later say, like someone who had been dropped there by accident. Which was, in every meaningful way, exactly what had happened. The convoy belonged to King Caelan Dre of the Northern Pack Territories. It was carrying sealed documents from the border summit, 23 signed agreements, 4 amended trade charters, and 1 very sensitive map that had taken 11 months to negotiate. The carriages were supposed to be locked. The third carriage from the front was supposed to be empty. Nobody could explain how Lyra had gotten into it. She had a ticket for a public transport coach leaving Dunmore at 9:30. That coach was still sitting at the depot, 1 passenger short. The depot worker remembered her, a small woman, brown hair, a bag that was too heavy for her, and a look on her face like she was already somewhere else in her head. He had pointed her toward the coaches. He had been quite specific about which one. She had walked in exactly the wrong direction and climbed into exactly the wrong carriage and gone to sleep on documents that were not meant to be touched by civilian hands. None of this was what woke her. What woke her was the silence. Not the silence of a sleeping house, or the silence of an empty road. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that has weight, the kind that means something large is very close and has decided, for reasons of its own, to hold very still. Lyra opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the window. Through it, she could make out the shape of high stone walls, torches burning in iron brackets, and a courtyard full of soldiers who were all looking at something that was not her. Then the carriage door opened, the one on her side, and the silence came inside. She turned her head. She had seen dogs before. She liked dogs. She had grown up near a farm in the eastern valleys, and she had spent a considerable portion of her childhood following a border collie named Pip around like a devoted shadow. She knew dogs. She was comfortable with dogs. This was not a dog. It was the size of a draft horse. It was silver black, the kind of color that changes depending on how the light hits it, like storm clouds moving. Its eyes were a pale gold that seemed to produce their own light from somewhere behind the iris. It stood in the open doorway of the carriage, and it filled the space so completely that Lyra could not see anything behind it. She stared at it. It stared at her. She was aware, in a distant and academic way, that she should probably be frightened. She was aware that the correct response to finding a creature of this size looking at her from a distance of approximately 3 feet was something involving screaming or running, or at minimum making a noise of some kind. What she actually did was look down at her journal, which had slid off the seat and landed on the floor near the creature's front paw, and say, in a voice that came out considerably calmer than she had any right to expect, "That is my journal." The creature looked at the journal. Then it looked back at her. Then it put its nose against her wrist. It did not sniff. It did not investigate. It pressed its nose to the inside of her wrist with a deliberateness that did not feel like an animal checking a smell. It felt like something being confirmed, like a fact being verified against a record that already existed somewhere. Lyra did not move. Outside, she could hear the soldiers, not talking. The soldiers had stopped talking some time ago. What she heard was the specific sound of a large number of people holding their breath at the same time. The creature did not move its nose from her wrist for a long time. Then it sat down. Right there, in the doorway of the carriage, on top of the folded wool blanket that had slid to the floor along with her journal. It sat down like a decision had been made and the matter was settled and there was nothing further to discuss. "Right," Lyra said. She picked up her journal from next to the creature's enormous paw. She looked at the ink stain she could now feel on her cheek. She looked at the soldiers outside, who were beginning to exchange glances with one another in the way that people do when they understand something significant has happened but cannot agree on what it means. She looked back at the creature. I am going to need someone to explain this to me, she said, in simple terms, starting with where I am. Nobody answered her, but one of the soldiers in the courtyard turned and walked very quickly in the direction of the palace, and his walk became a run about halfway across the stones, and the sound of his boots echoed off the walls long after he had disappeared through the inner doors. Lyra sat back against the carriage seat. The creature put its chin on the edge of the seat beside her knee and looked up at her with its pale gold eyes. I missed my coach, she told it. It blinked slowly. I had notes to organize, she said. It did not appear to consider this relevant. Lyra looked out the window at the stone walls and the torches and the soldiers who were still not quite sure what to do. The sky above the courtyard walls was the dark blue of very late afternoon, and the air coming in through the open door was cold in the way that northern air is always cold, carrying the smell of pine and frost and something else she could not name. Something older, something that had no match in the catalogue of her experience. She looked at the creature again, at the solid, settled weight of it, at the way it had not moved since it sat down, and showed no signs of intending to move. She had been on her way to the archive to correct 11 miles of border errors on a century-old territorial map. She had a letter of introduction from her employer, a man named Aldrich Voss, her father's brother, not that she thought about that much, and a bag of surveying tools and 2 good pens and absolutely no plan whatsoever for ending up in a royal convoy surrounded by soldiers, while a wolf the size of a small building decided she was worth sitting next to. This is not how today was supposed to go, she informed it. The creature's tail moved once against the carriage floor, not quite a wag, more like an acknowledgement. The sound of boots returned, more than one pair this time, a lot more than one pair. And then there was another silence, sharper than the first one, with an edge to it, and Lyra looked up to see a man standing in the courtyard where none had been a moment before. She could not see his face clearly from inside the carriage. She could see that he was tall. She could see that the soldiers around him had all shifted their posture by some small involuntary degree, the way people do when something with real authority enters a space. She could see that he was looking at the carriage. She could see, even from this distance, the exact moment his gaze found the creature in the doorway. And she could see, though she would not have been able to explain how she knew it, that what he felt in that moment was not surprise. It was something that looked, from the outside, like a man watching a thing he had stopped believing in walk back through a door he thought had been permanently closed. He did not move toward the carriage. The creature did not move toward him. They looked at each other across the courtyard with the particular stillness of 2 things that have a very long and complicated history, and are not ready to speak about it yet. Lyra looked from the man to the creature and back again. You belong to him, she said. The creature did not look at her when she said this. That, she thought, was probably an answer. The man in the courtyard finally moved. He said something to the soldier nearest him, short, controlled words that did not carry across the stones, and the soldier nodded and came toward the carriage. Lyra straightened her collar. She removed the pen cap from her hair, where she had apparently stored it at some point during the journey, without registering that she had done so. She checked that her journal was in her bag, and her bag was on her shoulder. The soldier arrived at the carriage door and looked from Lyra to the creature and back to Lyra with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite getting there. Miss, he said. Yes, said Lyra. The Alpha King requests that you come with me. Lyra looked past him to the man in the courtyard, who had not looked away from the carriage since he arrived. Requests, she said. Yes, miss. She considered this for a moment. And if I decline? The soldier's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. You are welcome to tell him so yourself. Lyra thought about her journal. She thought about the 11 miles of border errors. She thought about the archive, which was warm and quiet, and full of maps, and absolutely 0 enormous wolves or kings who looked at things like that. She thought about the feeling of something pressing against her wrist with the weight of a decision that had already been made. Fine, she said. She stood up. She collected her bag. She looked at the creature in the doorway, which still had not moved. You are going to need to get out of the way, she told it. It stood up. It stepped down from the carriage. It moved to her left side as she climbed down after it and stayed there, exactly 1 pace behind her left shoulder, as she walked across the courtyard. Every soldier they passed watched them. Nobody said anything. The man was waiting at the edge of the courtyard. Up close, he was younger than she had expected from the way people arranged themselves around him. Not young, not in the way that means inexperienced. Young in the way that means he had carried something heavy for a long time, and his face had learned to show only what he chose to show. His eyes were dark, Not the pale gold of the creature beside her, but something much harder to read. He looked at her. He looked at the creature. His jaw worked for a fraction of a second, and then stopped. "You are the cartographer's assistant," he said. "I am a cartographer," Lyra said. "The assistant title is a billing arrangement." A silence. "You were in a sealed carriage carrying classified documents." "I was asleep," she said. "I thought it was the public coach." "The public coach is not sealed with the royal crest. The public coach also usually has other passengers. I thought it was a slow day." Something moved behind his eyes. She could not tell what it was. "You are not frightened," he said. It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. "I have been awake for approximately 3 minutes and I am still holding my journal. Give me time." He looked at the journal, at the ink on her cheek, which she had apparently not managed to remove, at the creature standing 1 pace behind her left shoulder, which had not taken its eyes off his face since they approached. "You will be given rooms," he said. "You will be fed. You will not leave the inner walls until I say otherwise." "That sounds like an arrest." "It sounds like hospitality," he said, "because that is what I am choosing to call it." Lyra opened her mouth. She closed it again. He turned and walked back toward the palace. The soldiers moved without being told. The courtyard, which had been completely still, began to reorganize itself around his departure like water finding a new shape after a stone has been dropped into it. The creature pressed lightly against her left side. Lyra looked down at it. "Right," she said, for the second time that evening. She was not at the archive. She was not going to be at the archive tonight, or possibly tomorrow. Her notes were not organized. Her journal had a small new dirt mark on the cover from where it had landed on the floor of a carriage that she should not have been inside. She had just been arrested, very politely, by a king she did not know, in a country that was not technically hers, because a wolf the size of an architectural feature had decided to sit down in a doorway and refuse to move. She followed the soldiers toward the palace doors. She was already making a list in her head. Item 1. Determine legal status. Item 2. Find a map of this palace, because the one that had been published in the provincial registry was, she was almost certain, wrong by at least 2 corridors. Item 3. Figure out what the wolf wanted. She paused on the threshold. She looked back at the creature, which was still 1 pace behind her left shoulder, still watching her with those pale gold eyes. "You started this," she told it. It walked through the doors beside her like it had always intended to end up exactly here. Which, it was becoming increasingly clear to Lyra, was exactly what had happened. She did not know, yet, that it had also always intended to end up beside her. She would figure that out later. She usually figured things out later. It was, her Uncle Aldrich always said, her most reliable quality, and her most inconvenient one. Tonight, she focused on item 1. The king's name, she learned from the soldier assigned to walk her to her rooms, was Kalen Dre. He had held the Northern Pact territories for 6 years. Before that, there had been a war. The soldier did not elaborate on that, and before the war, there had been a different kind of order. "And the wolf?" Lyra asked. The soldier hesitated. "That," he said carefully, "is the king's wolf. I know it belongs to him," she said. "I meant what kind of wolf is it? What is its name? How old is it? Why did it—" She stopped. Because the wolf was still beside her, still 1 pace behind her left shoulder, still inside the palace, moving through corridors lined with torchlight and old stone tapestries, matching her step for step. The soldier was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one people made when something was happening that had no obvious category. "The wolf does not usually come inside," the soldier said. "That is very interesting information," said Lyra. "Thank you." The soldier showed her to a room with a fire already burning and a tray of food on the table and a window that looked out over the inner wall to the dark shape of the territory beyond. A good room, a warm room, a room that did not feel like a cell but was almost certainly one, in the ways that mattered. "Will there be anything else, miss?" the soldier asked. "Yes," said Lyra. "Do you have paper and a second pen? Mine is running low." He found her paper. He found her a pen. He left. The wolf lay down in front of the fire. Lyra sat at the table, opened her journal, and began item 1. She wrote, "What does the law of the Northern Pact territories say about civilians found in royal convoys?" She underlined it. She looked at the wolf. "Do you know?" she asked. The wolf put its head on its paws. "Right," she said, and started writing. She wrote for 2 hours before she fell asleep again, this time with her face on the paper and her pen still in her hand. The fire burned down slowly. The wolf did not move. Outside, in the corridors of the palace, 3 different senior advisors were trying to get an audience with the king to explain what had happened, and what it meant and what should be done about it. King Calandre received none of them that night. He stood at his study window, which looked out over the inner courtyard, for a very long time after everyone else had gone to sleep. He was looking at nothing in particular. Or he was looking at a door he had believed was permanently closed, and trying to decide what it meant that it had opened. He did not decide anything that night. But in the morning, when the first report came in, the wolf had not left the girl's room, had not eaten, had not responded to his summons. Calandre read it twice, very carefully, and then set it down on his desk. He picked up a second document, the cartographer's survey notes, which had been recovered from the girl's bag, scanned for security, and returned without her knowledge. Standard procedure. He read her margin corrections. He read them again. He set that document down beside the first one. The north border, she had written, in handwriting that was precise and slightly slanted and not in any way asking permission. Wrong by 11 miles. The ridge marked as the boundary is a secondary formation. The actual defensive line is here. She had drawn a small arrow. It pointed to a location that no official surveyor had identified in 6 years of territorial management. Kalen looked at the arrow for a long time. He thought about the wolf. He thought about the sealed carriage. He thought about a woman who had woken up in the wrong place and immediately asked for paper. He picked up a pen. He wrote at the top of a blank page, "Cartographer's assistant, Lyra Voss." He crossed out assistant. He wrote, "Cartographer." Then he set the pen down and went to find his counsel, and did not let any of what he was thinking show on his face. He was very good at that. He had been doing it for 6 years. It was getting, in ways he could not explain and would not have admitted, just slightly harder to do than it used to be. The wolf was named Sael. Lyra found this out on the second morning, from the palace physician who came to check on her. Not because she had asked for one, but because, as the physician explained with carefully maintained professional neutrality, protocol required a medical evaluation for any civilian who had been in contact with a bonded pack wolf without prior authorization. "Bonded," Lyra repeated. "Yes," said the physician. Her name was Dr. Marin Cole, and she had the kind of calm that comes from having seen a very large number of surprising things and deciding to simply process them one at a time. A pack wolf, particularly one of Sael's age and rank, forms a bond with its alpha. The alpha is the king. The bond is lifelong. "I understand what a bond is," Lyra said. "I am asking what it means that the wolf sat down next to me." Dr. Cole wrote something in her file. "That," she said, "is a question for the king." "I have other questions for the king," Lyra said. "He has not come." "No," Dr. Cole agreed. "He has not." She finished her evaluation. Lyra was fine, physically, and the physician noted this with a small nod that suggested she had been prepared for a different result, and packed her bag and left. Sael watched her go from the doorway. "Sael," Lyra said, testing the word. The wolf's ear turned toward her, not both ears, just the left one. "Is that your name?" she asked. "Both ears now." "I am going to take that as a yes," she said, and went back to her list. Item 1 was more complicated than she had anticipated. The law of the Northern Pack territories regarding civilians and royal convoys was 12 pages long, and had not been updated since the reign of Kalen's grandfather, who had apparently had a great deal of strong feelings about unauthorized carriage entries, and had drafted legislation accordingly. The relevant section was paragraph 9, subsection 4, which stated that any civilian found in a sealed royal transport without documentation was to be held for assessment by the Crown until such time as a determination of intent could be made. The word assessment was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Lyra circled it. She wrote next to it, "How long does assessment typically take?" And then below that, "Who decides when intent has been determined?" She looked at Sael. "Him, I assume," she said. Sael's tail moved once. "That is not reassuring," she told the wolf. She got up. She had been given clean clothes, practical ones, which she appreciated, whoever had thought to make that choice, and her bag had been returned to her with everything inside, her tools and her journal, and her letter of introduction, which was now somewhat irrelevant. She went to the window. From here she could see the inner courtyard where she had arrived, and beyond it, through a gap in the wall, the beginning of what she guessed was the main palace wing. The architecture was older than she had expected, older than any of the provincial records described, stone that had been built to last, Not to impress. Functional. Honest. She liked honest buildings. They were easier to map. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started sketching the angles she could see from the window. Not a full survey, just proportions, rough orientations, the relationship between the outer wall and the tower to the northeast, which was sitting at an angle that the provincial registry had not accounted for. She had been drawing for about 20 minutes when the door opened. She did not look up. "If you are Dr. Cole again, I am still fine." "I am not Dr. Cole," said a voice. She looked up. King Kalen Dre stood in the doorway. He was dressed differently than he had been in the courtyard, less formal, though she suspected the difference was subtle enough that most people would not have noticed. What she noticed was that he was looking at the paper in her hands, at the sketch. She watched him register what it was. She watched him register that she had been mapping his palace from a window. She waited to see if this would be the thing that made him angry. It was not, apparently, the thing. "You corrected the border survey," he said. "In the margins," she said. It seemed impolite to use a separate sheet. The documents were sealed. "The corrections were necessary," she said. "The ridge you have been treating as your northern boundary is the wrong ridge. The actual defensive high ground is 11 miles east. If anyone has been stationing guards based on those maps—" "They have," he said. A silence. "Then it is fortunate," she said carefully, "that I corrected it." He came into the room. He did not ask permission. He moved like someone who had not had to ask permission for a room in a very long time, and had stopped remembering that the habit existed. He stopped a few feet from where she was standing and looked at the sketch in her hands. "May I?" he said. She handed it to him. He looked at it for a long time. "You did this from the window." "Yes. Without instruments." "I have instruments in my bag," she said, "but proportional sketching does not strictly require them. It requires looking at things correctly." He looked up from the paper. At her. It was the same look he had given her in the courtyard. Measuring. Contained. Not unfriendly but not warm. "Why did you correct the documents?" he said. "You could have left them. You could have said nothing. No one would have known you had seen them." "I would have known," she said. Another silence. This one felt different from the first. "I have questions," she said, "about my legal status here, specifically about paragraph 9, subsection 4 of the Territorial Transport Code." Something shifted in his expression. It was brief and she almost missed it. "You have been reading the Territorial Code." "I asked for paper," she said. "The soldier who brought it was thorough. He also brought you the Territorial Code." "I asked for research materials," she said. He interpreted broadly. "I appreciate that in a person." Kalen looked at her for a moment with that unreadable expression. Then he sat down. Not in a formal way. He pulled out the chair across from her table, and sat in it like a man who was tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and looked at the sketch again. "The assessment period is not defined in the code," he said. "It has never been challenged." "I am considering challenging it," she said. "I know," he said. "That is why I am here." Lyra put down her pen. This was the first honest thing she had heard since arriving, and she recognized it for what it was. "What does it mean," she said, "that your wolf sat down in the doorway of that carriage and would not move?" "Dr. Cole told me to ask you." Kalen was quiet for a moment. He set the sketch down on the table between them. "Sael has not accepted a resting position in a space that I have not been present in for 6 years," he said. "Not since." He stopped. "In 6 years." Lyra looked at Sael, who was lying in front of the fire again, and appeared to be asleep, which she was fairly sure was a performance. "That seems significant," she said. "It is," he said. "And you are going to tell me what it signifies." He looked at her. "Eventually," he said. She picked up her pen again. "Then I will add it to the list." "You have a list." "I always have a list," she said. He stood up. He picked up the sketch and held it for a moment as if deciding something, and then set it back down. "There are maps in the Eastern Study that have not been corrected in 40 years, he said. "If you are going to be here, you might as well be useful." Lyra looked at him. "If I am going to be here," she said, "meaning you have not yet decided how long I will be here." "No," he said. "But you have decided I will not be leaving today." "No," he said. "You will not." She wrote item 4 on her list. Eastern Study. 40-year-old maps. "Fine," she said. "Send someone to show me where it is." He left without answering. But 20 minutes later, a soldier appeared at her door to take her to the Eastern Study. She brought her pen. She brought her journal. She walked through the corridors of the palace with Sael 1 pace behind her left shoulder, and she looked at everything, and she remembered everything she saw, And by the time she reached the eastern study, she had already begun a rough floor plan in her head. The maps were worse than 40 years old. Some of them were 100. Some of them were wrong in ways that were simply errors of measurement, and some of them were wrong in ways that suggested the original surveyors had been working from memory rather than instruments, or from political considerations rather than geographical reality. Lyra sat down at the table. She spread the first map out in front of her. She found the errors inside of 3 minutes. She started correcting. She did not think about the king, or the wolf, or the list, or the word assessment, or the way Kalen Dre had said eventually, as if it were a promise he had not entirely decided to make. She thought about the maps. She thought about the 11 miles. She thought about the ridge. Outside, in the corridors, a new set of conversations was beginning between people who had titles and opinions, and a great deal of interest in the arrival of a civilian woman in a sealed carriage. She could hear the distant sound of it, the particular register of voices that meant something political was being discussed. She uncapped her pen. Sael put his chin on the edge of the table. "Don't distract me," she told him. He moved his chin off the table. She corrected the next map. She worked until the torches were lit, and the fire was stoked by someone who came and went without speaking, and the tray of food that appeared at her elbow was eaten without her noticing she had done it. And outside, in the palace she was already mapping in her head, the Alpha King of the Northern Pact territories stood at a window and read a single line that one of his advisors had placed on his desk that afternoon. The line was from paragraph 9, subsection 4 of the Territorial Transport Code. His advisor had underlined it. The line said, "A civilian found in a sealed royal transport may be detained indefinitely, pending determination of intent, at the discretion of the Crown." Below it, his advisor had written, "She is already asking questions about this, sir." Kalen read the line. He read it again. He set the paper down. He thought about the sketch, about the margins of the survey document, about the word eventually, and how it had come out of his mouth as if he meant it as a time frame and not a deflection. He thought about Sael, who had not come when called that morning for the first time in 6 years. He thought about a woman who had woken up in the wrong place and immediately asked for paper. He picked up his own pen. He wrote nothing. He stood at the window instead and watched the torches burn in the courtyard below, and let himself, just for the length of one breath, acknowledge the thing he had been refusing to acknowledge since he walked into the courtyard and saw what his wolf had done. Then he let the breath out. He went back to his council papers. He was the Alpha King. He had a kingdom to manage. The other thing could wait. It had already waited 6 years. A little longer would make no difference. He was fairly sure he believed that. He was becoming slightly less sure with every hour that passed, and Sael still did not come home. By the 4th day, Lyra had corrected 9 of the 14 major territorial maps in the Eastern Study, had begun drafting a revised survey index that the palace had not known it needed, and had gotten into 2 arguments with the head of the map archive, a man named Gordon Blake, who had very strong feelings about the original surveyors and felt that calling their work wrong was uncharitable. "I am not calling it uncharitable," Lyra had said. "I am calling it incorrect. The river here," she pointed to a blue line on a map that showed it curving east around the base of the southern ridge, "does not curve east. It runs straight south for another half-mile before it turns. Anyone who has stood at that ridge in the last century would know that. The original survey was conducted in the 3rd year of the previous king's reign," Gordon said stiffly. "And the river has not moved since then," said Lyra, "which is rather my point." Gordon had gone to complain to someone. Lyra did not know who. She assumed it would reach the king eventually, because everything seemed to reach the king eventually, and she found she did not particularly mind. She was more interested in the map. Sael had taken to lying under the work table during the day. He fit, barely. When Lyra moved her chair back without thinking, she always hit his side first, and he always exhaled through his nose in the way that very large things do when they are mildly inconvenienced but have decided not to make it an issue. "Sorry," she told him, the 3rd time. He exhaled. "You could sleep somewhere else," she said. He put his chin on his paws and looked at the far wall. "Right," she said. The maps in the Eastern Study were not the only thing that concerned her. The palace itself had 4 corridors that were not on any plan she had seen, old ones, narrow, the kind that get built during renovations and then forgotten. She had found them by following Sael on the 2nd evening, when he had stood up from the fire and looked at her with an expression that she had begun to interpret as "come on." She had followed. She had found the corridors. She had sketched them. She did not tell anyone about them. She did not know yet whether they were relevant, but she put them in her journal under a tab she labeled Unknown Structure, and she noted the direction each one ran, and she added a small note at the bottom, possibly original foundation era, pre-palace construction. Investigate. On the fourth day, the council meeting happened. She knew about it because the level of foot traffic in the corridors outside the Eastern study changed. More boots, more voices, a certain direction to the movement, all of it pointing toward the great hall at the center of the palace. She kept working. About an hour into the meeting, she estimated by the light, the door to the Eastern study opened, and a soldier said, "The king requests your presence." Lyra looked up. "At the council meeting." "Yes, miss." She looked at her map. She was in the middle of a correction. "I will be there in 10 minutes. The soldier blinked. "The king requests." "I heard you," she said. "Tell him 10 minutes. There was a pause. "I will tell him that, miss." She finished the correction. She capped her pen. She checked that her journal was in her bag, and her notes were in order. She walked to the great hall with Sael beside her, entered without announcement because no one had thought to arrange for an announcement, and found herself standing at the end of a long table surrounded by approximately 15 people, who all stopped talking at exactly the same moment. Kalen was at the head of the table. He looked at her. His expression was entirely neutral. "You are 10 minutes late," he said. "I was in the middle of a correction," she said. "I finished it." A short silence around the table. The kind that means people are deciding how to react. "Sit down," Kalen said. There was a chair. It was not at the far end where visitors typically sat. She had been in enough rooms like this to know where visitors typically sat. It was midway down the table, between an older man with a general's insignia and a woman with a surveyor's guild pin that Lyra recognized from her own professional association. She sat down. Sael lay down behind her chair. The silence intensified briefly, and then the council meeting resumed. Because Kalen began speaking and people at his table did not, it became clear. Pause for long. He was talking about the border. He was talking, specifically, about the 11 miles. He was talking about what it meant for territorial defense, and supply line positioning, and 3 patrol routes that had been running along the wrong ridge for 4 years, and what it was going to take to reroute them. He was not looking at Lyra, but once, midway through, he said, "The correction was identified by the civilian cartographer currently resident in the Eastern study," and he said it in the same flat, factual tone he used for everything else. The general beside her, his name was Hartley. She caught it from the conversation, turned his head and looked at her. "You found the 11 miles, he said. "It was already there," she said. "I just wrote it down." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was not quite the usual one, something more careful, more considered. "How long have you been practicing?" he asked. "Since I was 12, she said. "My father was a surveyor." He turned back to the table. He said nothing else to her during the meeting. At the end of the meeting, when most of the council had left, Kalen remained. He remained so naturally that Lyra did not realize she was also remaining until the room had emptied except for the 2 of them and Sael, who had not moved. "The patrol rerouting will take 3 weeks, he said. He was looking at the map they had pinned to the wall during the meeting, the corrected one, a copy she had made the night before at someone's request, though no one had told her what for. "Yes," she said, "approximately, depending on weather and the terrain between the ridges." "Can you calculate the new defensible perimeter?" She looked at the map. "I can. It will take 2 days. I will need access to the elevation records, which I believe are in the lower archive." "You will have them," he said. She nodded. She stood. "Lyra," he said. She stopped. He had used her name. She noted that she had been expecting him not to. "The council would like a determination of intent," he said. Paragraph 9, subsection 4. She turned around. "What would they like to determine?" "Whether you are here by accident," he said, "or by design." "I was asleep," she said. "I know." "Then the intent was to reach the provincial archive," she said, "which I have not yet done." "No," he said, "you have not." "Does the council consider that clarifying?" "Not entirely," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the map. His hands were flat on the table, and she noticed, because she noticed things like this, it was an occupational habit, that he wore no rings. She knew from the provincial records that the previous queen had been dead for 3 years. She knew that he had been king for 6. She knew the territory's history in the same way she knew the history of any land she worked in, through its documents, its margins, its corrections. She did not know him. He did not know her. But Sael had sat down in the carriage door and had not gotten up again. "I am not a spy," she said. I know, he said again. I am a cartographer who made a navigational error and ended up in the wrong vehicle. I know. Then why? Because the council needs a category for you, he said, and the category they want is not one I intend to give them. She looked at him for a long moment. What category do they want? He looked up from the map. At her, directly. Threat, he said. A silence. And the category you intend to give them? She said. He looked back at the map. Staff, he said. On temporary assignment. Lyra considered this. I do not recall accepting a position. The elevation records will be delivered to the Eastern Study tomorrow morning, he said. She looked at him for another moment. She looked at Sael, who had raised his head and was watching Kaelin with those pale gold eyes, in a way that she was beginning to understand meant something she did not yet have words for. I want access to the full lower archive, she said. Yes, he said. And I want the territorial code amended in writing to clarify the definition of assessment. He looked at her. I will take it under advisement, he said. That is a very careful way of saying probably not immediately, she said. Yes, he said, it is. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped because she had a habit of stopping when something needed to be said, and this was one of those moments. Item 3 on my list, she said, without turning around. You mentioned a list, he said. I want to know what it means, she said. What the wolf did. What it is called. What it means for both of us. Not eventually, specifically, within the week. A silence. Within the week, he said. She left. In the corridor, Sael fell into step beside her. She did not look at him, but she said, quietly, so that only he could hear it, How long have you been waiting to do that? His tail moved once, steady, certain, like he had been waiting long enough, like the wait was over now. By the end of the first week, Lyra had corrected 14 maps and started on a 15th. She had identified 3 additional surveying errors in the territorial boundary records, 2 of which had active military implications that Hartley had been quietly alarmed about when she presented them. She had found 6 of the unknown corridors in the Palace Foundation and sketched them all. She had been given access to the lower archive, which was cold and poorly lit and absolutely full of documents that nobody had touched in decades, and she had been genuinely, deeply happy in it. She had also, despite everything, started to learn the palace. Not just the corridors and the angles of the rooms, though she knew those. She had started to learn the rhythm of it. The way the West Wing was quieter in the mornings because the council chambers were there and the council did not meet before 9. The way the kitchens, 2 floors below the Eastern Study, smelled of bread by 5 in the morning, and that smell traveled up through the walls in a way the building's original architect had probably not anticipated. The way the guards rotated every 3 hours and the third rotation, the one at midnight, was the quietest, because by midnight even guards get tired. She had also started to learn Sael. This was less deliberate but equally thorough. She knew the pitch of his exhale when he was genuinely annoyed versus when he was making a comment. She knew the way he positioned himself, always to her left, always 1 pace back, except when something was wrong, in which case he moved to her right, and slightly forward, in a way that meant pay attention. She knew that he did not like the corridor near the north staircase, though she did not know why, and she had learned to go the long way around without being asked. She knew that he had been sitting at the foot of her bed when she woke up on the 3rd morning, not sleeping, just sitting, facing the door. She had not asked, but she had thought about it. On the 7th day, she went to find the king. This was not a thing she had done before. He came to her, to the Eastern Study, to the council meetings when he needed her, once to the lower archive at 10 in the evening when she was still working, and he wanted to look at the elevation records himself. He came. She did not go to him. But she had said within the week, and within the week was ending, and she had a list. She found him in his study. A different study than the Eastern one, the real one, the one near the throne room where the actual work happened. The door was open, which she took as sufficient permission, and she walked in. He looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been expecting something and had spent the last 7 days deciding how to handle it when it arrived. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. She put her journal on the desk. She opened it to the page with the list. Item 3, she said. He put down his pen. The wolf soul, he said, is a feature of pack heritage. Not all wolves have it. Sael has it. It is older than the current pack hierarchy. It predates, in fact, most of the records we have. She was writing. The wolf soul can recognize what we call a chosen bond, he said. An individual, human or pack-born, with whom the wolf chooses to establish a connection. This is not the same as the bond between a wolf and its alpha. It is a separate thing. And it has not happened before, she said, with Sael. Not in 6 years, he said. Not since. Not in 6 years, he said, with finality that was not angry but was not open. She did not push. She wrote. What does it mean for me? She said. Practically. Legally. Physically. Practically, he said. It means Sael will follow you. It means he will not allow harm to come to you if he can prevent it. It means that if you leave the territory he will want to follow, and restraining him from doing so is, he paused, not something I am willing to do indefinitely. And legally, there is no law that governs a chosen bond with a human civilian, he said. There has never been a need for one. Until now. Until now, he agreed. She wrote for a moment, then she put the pen down and looked at him. And the part you haven't said, she said. He met her eyes. The chosen bond is not one-directional, he said. It reflects. Whatever Sael recognizes in you, whatever quality or element draws him, it creates a corresponding awareness in the alpha. In me. Silence. What kind of awareness? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Directional, he said. I know which direction you are in. I know when you leave a room. I know when something is wrong, though I have not yet tested that particular aspect. She looked at him. That is very strange, she said. Yes, he said. And not something either of us chose. No, he said. He picked up her pen again. She wrote item 3. Bond. Chosen. Non-directional. Legal status unresolved. She looked at what she had written. She added, he knows which direction I am in. She looked at that for a moment. What do you want to do about it? She asked. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully categorize. Something careful. Something that had been held very still for a long time and was not used to being asked. I want to find out, he said slowly, what the north border looks like with an accurate survey. She held his gaze. That is not what I asked. No, he said. It is not. A silence. I do not know yet, he said. What I want. I have not had occasion to. It is not a question I have answered recently. She understood that. Not the specific shape of it, not the details she did not know and he had not shared, but the structure of it, the particular difficulty of wanting something when you have spent a long time not allowing yourself to want things. She knew that structure. She knew it from the inside. She closed her journal. I am going back to the lower archive, she said. The elevation records for the eastern ridge have some anomalies I want to look at. She stood. Lyra, he said. She stopped. Item 7, he said. On your list. She looked at him. She had shown no one the list. She had left it in her room, locked. She had improvised a lock from a hairpin and a doorstop, which was not elegant but was functional. How do you know there is an item 7? She said. Sael told me, he said. She looked at the wolf who was lying by the study window and appearing to be profoundly uninvolved. That is not how wolves communicate, she said. No, he agreed. It is not. She looked back at him. He was watching her with that careful, contained expression. Item 7, she said, asks what you actually want. Not the wolf, not the bond, not the kingdom. She paused. You. He said nothing. You do not have to answer it now, she said. I know, he said. But I would like you to answer it eventually, she said. And I mean eventually as a time frame, not a deflection. He almost smiled. She saw it. The edge of something that had not quite made it to his face in time. Within the week, he said. She looked at him for a moment. That is a very careful way of saying yes. Yes, he said. It is. She left. In the corridor she walked quickly, the way she did when she was thinking through something that had more pieces than she had expected. Sael kept pace beside her, easy, unhurried, as if they had been doing this for years and the question of direction had never been in doubt. She thought about the bond. She thought about directions. She thought about a man who had not had occasion to answer a certain kind of question recently, and the way he had looked when he said it. Not like someone who did not have an answer. Like someone who had been keeping the answer somewhere carefully, in a drawer that he had not opened in a long time, and was only now beginning to remember which key it took. She thought about Sael, who had sat down in the doorway of the carriage before she was even awake, who had known, before any of them did, that something was beginning. You are very sure of yourself, she told him. He looked ahead. She turned toward the lower archive. She had work to do. She always had work to do. But she found, for the first time in a long time, that the work did not feel like the only thing. It felt like the framework. And something else, something without a map yet, was starting to fill in the space between the lines. There are two kinds of courts. The first kind is made of stone and ceremony, rules and precedent, titles spoken in order, chairs arranged by rank, every gesture calculated and recorded. This kind of court is visible. You can draw it on a map. You can learn its structure in a week if you pay attention. The second kind is invisible. It runs alongside the first one, faster and quieter, made of loyalty and old grudges and things said in corridors that never appear in any official record. This court has no map. You cannot draw it. You can only feel it, the way you feel a current in water that does not disturb the surface. Lyra had spent a decade and a half working in provincial offices and territorial archives across 4 different regions, and she had learned both kinds of court. She knew that the visible one made the decisions that were written down, and the invisible one made the decisions that mattered. By the end of the second week, she understood that King Talon Dre had mastered both. She understood this not from anything he told her, but from watching how other people behaved when he was not in the room. The council members who spoke freely when they thought no one of consequence was listening, and then became careful when they remembered that the king's wolf was in the corner, watching, and that whatever the wolf knew, the king would eventually know too. She understood this from the way Gordon Blake, the archive master, stopped arguing with her corrections on the 11th day, not because he had changed his mind, because someone had said something to him, quietly, in the kind of way that leaves no record. She understood this from the way Hartley had started nodding at her in the corridor, not the polite nod of an officer acknowledging a civilian, but the specific nod of one professional acknowledging another, subtle, considered. The invisible court was making up its mind about her. She kept working. The elevation records for the Eastern Ridge did have anomalies, 4 of them, running in a line that was too regular to be natural, spaced approximately 800 meters apart. Lyra looked at them for 2 days before she understood what she was seeing. Watchtower foundations. Old ones. Older than the palace, older than the current pack hierarchy, old enough that the towers themselves had been dismantled and the records of their existence had been buried under a century of subsequent surveying. She sat very still at the archive table when she understood this. Because the towers were on the Eastern Ridge, the real Eastern Ridge, the one that was 11 miles from where the current maps had been placing the border. Someone, a long time ago, had known where the real defensive line was, had built on it, and then, at some point, the knowledge had been lost, or hidden, or deliberately removed. She wrote a note. She sealed it. She gave it to the soldier at the archive door and said, "For the king." The soldier left. She went back to the elevation records. Sael, under the table, shifted and put his chin on her foot. "I know," she said. "It is going to make things complicated." He exhaled. "They were probably going to be complicated anyway," she said. He exhaled again, with slightly more emphasis. She looked down at him. "Thank you for the commentary." He looked back at the documents. She went back to work. Kalen arrived in the archive 40 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him. The particular quality of silence that arrived with him. The way the air in a space changed when he entered it. She had started to notice this on about the 5th day, and had noted it, professionally, as a characteristic of people in positions of sustained authority. They changed the room. He came to the table. He looked at the elevation records. He looked at what she had marked. "The foundations," he said. "You knew about them," she said. "Not the location," he said. "I knew there were old tower records in the Foundation archive. I did not know they corresponded to the Eastern Ridge." She pointed to the spacing. 800 meters, standard defensive spacing for this type of terrain, historically, which means whoever built them knew the ridge, knew its defensive value. "And then the knowledge disappeared," he said. "Or was removed," she said. He looked at her. "I am not accusing anyone," she said. "I do not have enough information to accuse anyone. I am saying that the distribution of the errors in your territorial records is not random. It is consistent. The errors all minimize the value of the Eastern Ridge and the real border position. That is a pattern, not a coincidence." He was very still. "How long?" he said. "Would it take to document the full pattern?" she said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I would need access to records going back at least 150 years. "You will have them," he said. She nodded. She made a note. "Lyra," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with something behind his expression that was not the usual careful containment, something that had less distance to it. "This is important work," he said. She kept her voice level. "It is. Not to the kingdom," he said. "I mean, yes, to the kingdom. But also, He paused. He was choosing words with more care than she had heard from him before. I mean that you are doing something that no one in this palace has had the specific knowledge to do, and you arrived in a sealed carriage by accident. She looked at him. Are you suggesting that was not an accident? No, he said. I am suggesting. He stopped. That something arranged it, she said. He did not answer. He looked at the elevation records. He looked at the line of watchtower foundations that someone had buried under a century of false surveys. I do not believe in arranged things, she said. I believe in wind direction and road conditions and falling asleep in the wrong coach. I know, he said. But I will admit, she said, and she said it carefully, because she was careful with things she did not fully understand yet, that the results are interesting. He looked at her. Yes, he said. They are. They stood on opposite sides of the table with the old records between them, and neither of them said the thing that was underneath the conversation, because they were both people who had learned to be careful with underneath things. But it was there. She could feel it the same way she could feel the current in a river even when the surface was still. She went back to work. He stayed for another hour, reading through the Foundation archive documents she had pulled. He did not speak. She did not speak. This was, she had found, surprisingly comfortable. She was used to working alone. She had not expected working next to someone to feel like this. When he left, he said, "The upper archive is opening tomorrow. You will have access." She said, "Good." He left. Sael's tail moved twice under the table. She looked down at him. "Don't be smug," she said. He looked up at her with complete innocence. "You absolutely knew this was where we were going," she told him. "All of it, from the beginning." He put his chin back on her foot. "It is deeply inconvenient," she said, "to be outsmarted by a wolf." He exhaled with great satisfaction. She went back to work. In the corridor, returning to the main wing, Kaelin passed Hartley without stopping. "She found the tower foundations," Hartley said. "Yes," Kaelin said. "In the elevation records, that we have had for 40 years. "Yes," Kaelin said. Hartley was quiet for a moment. "She has been here 2 weeks." "Yes," Kaelin said. Hartley looked at him. "Are we going to talk about the other thing?" "No," Kaelin said. Hartley nodded slowly. "Right then." Kaelin kept walking. He had a council meeting at 4. He had correspondence from the Eastern guilds that needed responses. He had a rerouting plan for 3 patrol routes that was almost finalized. He had more work than hours, which had been true every day for 6 years and showed no signs of changing. He also had, for the first time in 6 years, a direction. Not a geographical one, not the kind you could mark on a map. The other kind. The kind that knew, without instruments, without calculation, without any of the tools he had learned to rely on, knew with a certainty that was old and unreasonable, and absolutely uninterested in his council schedule, which room she was in. He took his council meeting. He answered his correspondence. He finalized the patrol rerouting. He did not go back to the archive, but at some point in the early evening, without having made a decision about it, he stopped in the corridor outside the archive door and stood there for a moment. Through the door, he could hear nothing. The archive was quiet, but he knew she was still inside. He knew it the same way he had always known where Sael was, that direction sense that had been with him since the first day of his kingship, that constant background awareness. There was a second awareness now, sitting alongside it, quieter, newer, not yet fully formed, but growing. He stood in the corridor for another moment. Then he went back to his study. Item 7, he thought. Within the week. He sat down at his desk. He picked up his pen. He held it for a moment. He put it back down. Some answers needed more time than others. He told himself that was all it was. He was almost convinced. The delegation from the Eastern Syndicate arrived on a Wednesday, which Lyra knew was significant only because the palace's collective mood changed overnight, and she had learned, in 3 weeks, to read the palace's mood the way she read weather patterns in elevation data. She noticed it at breakfast. The servants moved differently. The guards in the corridors were rotated out for a second tier she had not seen before, and Gordon Blake, who she passed on the way to the upper archive, looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not unfriendly, something adjacent to warning. She filed it. The syndicate had sent 4 people. She saw them from the upper archive window, arriving through the main gate. 3 men and a woman, all in the careful, neutral dress that professional negotiators wore when they wanted to look neutral, and very much were not. Their carriages had the syndicate seal on the doors, a double ring mark that she knew from 3 years working in the Eastern provincial offices. She knew what the syndicate was, she knew what it did. She had worked in enough border territories to have a clear picture of how they operated, the careful cultivation of leverage, the long-game politics of making themselves indispensable to multiple parties while actually serving only one, their own. She went back to the upper archive documents. She had been 3 days into a 150-year review of territorial records, and she was finding the pattern she had predicted: consistent, systematic understatement of the Eastern Ridge, going back not 150 years but closer to 200. Someone had started the falsification well before the documents she had first examined. It was old work, patient work. She made notes. She cross-referenced. She did not speculate beyond what the documents directly supported. She worked until midday. Sael, who had been under the table, suddenly stood up. Lyra looked at him. He was facing the door, and his posture had changed, not to the forward alert position that meant pay attention, something different, something she had not seen before. "What is it?" she said. He did not move. The door opened. The woman from the syndicate delegation came in. She was older than Lyra had guessed from the window, 50 perhaps, with the kind of face that had been carefully managed into pleasantness and wore it without effort, the way a long-term habit becomes invisible. She was carrying nothing. Her hands were visible. These were the choices of someone who understood how to make an entrance. "Miss Voss," she said. "My name is Audrey Fenn. I represent the Eastern Syndicate Trade Partnership." "I know what the syndicate is," Lyra said. A small, practiced smile. "Of course. May I sit?" "No," Lyra said. The smile held. "I will be brief then. We have been aware of your presence here for some time. We wanted to offer you an alternative to your current situation." Lyra kept her expression neutral. "I was not aware my current situation required an alternative." "You are here under paragraph 9, subsection 4, Audrey Fenn said. "Detained at the discretion of the Crown. That is not, whatever it may look like, a voluntary arrangement." Lyra said nothing. "We can offer you extraction from the territory," the woman said. "Documentation, compensation for the disruption to your professional work, and a position, if you are interested, with the syndicate's own survey division. The work is well funded and conducted in regions with full civilian protections." Lyra looked at her. "And in exchange for this generosity?" Audrey Fenn's expression did not change. "We would appreciate a consultation on your recent findings, the territorial surveys, the border work." There it was. Lyra looked at the woman for a moment, then she looked at Sael, who had not moved from his position facing the door. "You said you have been aware of my presence for some time," Lyra said. "How long?" "Since the night you arrived." "Who told you?" "We have contacts in the territory," the woman said pleasantly, "as we do in most regions." "And you waited 3 weeks to approach me," Lyra said, "because you needed to know what I had found before you could properly value the exchange." A small pause. "The first real one." "We are prepared to offer," the woman began. "You mentioned my father," Lyra said. The woman stopped. Lyra had not been certain, but Audrey Fenn's pause confirmed it. "You did not mention him directly," Lyra said. "But you used the word family in your opening. People use that word when they have a lever, and they want you to feel it before they name it." The smile was gone. What replaced it was something cleaner, more honest, in its way. "Your father worked with the syndicate for 11 years, Audrey Fenn said, "before the accident." "The accident," Lyra said flatly. "Yes. You called it that." "It was the official determination," the woman said. Lyra picked up her pen. She looked at it. She set it back down. "I know what my father worked on," she said. "I know who he worked for. And I know what his relationship with the syndicate was in the last 2 years of his life. You can call it what you like." A silence. "The offer stands," the woman said. "Think about it." "I have thought about it," Lyra said. The woman raised an eyebrow. "No," Lyra said. "Thank you." Audrey Fenn looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, not the practiced pleasant nod from before, something more direct. "You are more like him than you know," she said. Lyra did not answer. The woman left. Lyra sat very still for a long moment. Sael moved to her left side and pressed his flank against her leg, not hard, just a steady, warm weight. She put her hand on his side without thinking about it. She stayed like that for a minute or so. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the records. She had documented the exchange in her journal within 10 minutes of the woman leaving. Every detail she could recall, exact words where possible. She dated it. She sealed the page with a strip of plain tape she had found in the archive supply drawer. She did not decide immediately what to do with it. She thought about the king who had not yet answered item 7 and had 3 days left on his self-imposed timeline. She thought about the invisible court and where the syndicate's contacts in it might be. She thought about 200 years of falsified surveys and a line of buried watchtower foundations that someone had gone to considerable effort to make disappear. She thought about her father, which she did as rarely as possible, because thinking about him required a kind of energy she preferred to spend on things she could actually affect. She did not think about the offer. She had meant what she said. She had thought about it in the 4 seconds after it was made, and the answer had not required additional time. She worked until the light changed and the torches were lit, and Sael pressed his nose to her elbow in the way that meant she had been sitting too long. "In a minute," she said. He pressed more firmly. "Right," she said. She stood. She packed her notes. She sealed the archive documents in their protective folders. She walked back through the corridors with Sael beside her, through the cold air of the north wing and the warmer air of the main passage, past the council chamber where she could hear voices still going, the syndicate delegation, she assumed, doing the visible work of their visit, and up the east stairs to the floor where her rooms were. She stopped at her door. There was a folded piece of paper on the floor, slid under the door. She picked it up. It was in Kalen's handwriting. She had seen enough of his written notes in the council documents to know it. It said, "Fenn's visit was reported to me before she reached the archive. If you will give me an account of what was said, I would value it. If you prefer not to, I understand. Either way, I want you to know that paragraph 9, subsection 4 has been amended." She turned the paper over. On the back, in the same handwriting, was a single line. "The assessment period is now defined. 90 days, with review." It was amended this afternoon. She looked at it. 90 days with review. He had not told her. He had slid it under her door. She went inside. She sat down at the table. She wrote out, from memory, a complete account of Audrey Fenn's visit. She included the offer, the implied lever about her father, the woman's final comment. She included the fact that Sael had been alert from the moment before the door opened. She folded it. She addressed it. She put it in the corridor for the night soldier to collect. She sat back. 90 days with review, she said to Sael. He was already in front of the fire. "That means we have roughly 67 days left," she said, "given the 3 weeks." He put his chin on his paws. "And he still has 3 days on item 7, she said. She looked at the fire. She thought about directions, about the awareness of which room someone was in, about whether it was possible to map something that had no geographical coordinates. She added a new item to her list. Item 22. Document the pattern. All of it. Not just the surveys. She stared at that for a moment. She crossed it out. She wrote it again in cleaner handwriting, because she was a professional and her notes should be legible. She went to sleep with the fire still burning and the sound of the wind coming through the old stone walls of a palace that she was beginning, despite everything, to know. The bond reached its threshold on a night with no warning. There had been signs, looking back. Lyra could identify them, the way she could identify the signs of geological shift in elevation data once she knew what she was looking for. Small things, accumulating. The way Kalen had started appearing in the upper archive without being there for any official reason. Not often, twice in the week following the syndicate's visit, but enough that she had noticed and noted it. He would come in the late afternoon, look at whatever she had spread on the table, ask 2 or 3 precise questions, and leave. The questions were always about the documents. He never stayed long. She never asked why he had come. The way Sael had started, on the 2nd week, sleeping across the threshold of her room at night rather than inside it. Not blocking the door, she could step over him easily, and he always shifted when she needed to pass. But outside, facing the corridor. The way she had found herself, on the 3rd week, taking the long route back from the upper archive that passed by the king's study window, without having made a conscious decision to do so. The way she had noticed, without intending to, what time of day the light in the corridor outside the study changed, which meant she could tell whether he was likely to be in the room based on the shadow pattern through the gap beneath the door. She did not add these things to her list. They were not the kind of thing that appeared on lists. The threshold arrived on a Thursday, at approximately 3 in the morning, when she woke from a sound sleep to find Sael on his feet with every muscle in his body absolutely still. She sat up. The room was quiet. The fire had burned low but not out. The corridor outside was silent. "What is it?" she said. Sael walked to the door. He put his nose to the gap beneath it. He came back. He sat down directly in front of her, facing her, and he looked at her. She had learned his expressions over a month of observation. This one she had not seen before. It was not the pay attention look. It was not the comfort weight of his flank against her leg, or the chin on her foot. This was something else. It was a look that said, "This matters. This is the thing. This is what everything has been leading to." "Sael," she said. He held her gaze. She felt something change, not in the room. In her. It was not painful, it was not dramatic, it was the way the air changes before a storm. A quality of pressure, of potential, of everything becoming very slightly more real than it had been a moment before, like a lens coming into focus. She sat very still. Somewhere in the palace, she did not have to think about which direction, she simply knew it the way she knew the direction of north without looking at a compass. Kaelin Dre was awake. She knew this. She had not known it before 3 in the morning on this particular Thursday. She knew it now with the same certainty she knew her own name. She got out of bed, she put on her boots, she took her journal, not for professional reasons but because she carried it the way some people carry a habit, and she did not think clearly without it in her hands. She stepped over Sael, who moved aside for her. She walked through the corridor. The palace at 3 in the morning was not empty. There were guards. There were always guards. But the guards she passed in the north corridor looked at her, and then looked past her, and did not stop her. She had noticed this before. Whatever Sael's presence communicated to the palace's security structure, it communicated something that superseded her civilian status. She reached the door of Kaelin's study. She knocked. A short pause. "Come in," he said. He was at his desk. He had been writing, papers spread around him, the particular organized chaos of someone who thinks through documents, and he had stopped when she knocked. He was looking at the door. He looked at her. He looked at Sael, who had come in behind her, and gone directly to the far corner of the room, and lay down with his back to both of them, in a way that was so deliberately uninvolved that Lyra might have found it funny under other circumstances. "You felt it," Kaelin said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "I felt something. I do not know what to call it." "The threshold," he said. "The bond has reached. There is a stage, a formal stage, after which it becomes," he paused, "after which it is not reversible." She stood just inside the door. "When does the stage close?" 24 hours, he said. "From 3 in the morning. From whenever the threshold is crossed. I do not know exactly when it crossed, but approximately." She looked at him. "What happens if you sever it?" He was quiet for a moment. "It will not harm you." "I did not ask about harm," she said. "I asked what happens." He looked at his desk, then at the window, then at her. "Sael and I would lose the direction sense, the bond awareness, He stopped again. He was choosing words carefully in the way he did when the thing he was describing had no clean professional vocabulary. "The knowing," he said. "We would lose the knowing." She thought about this. "And you?" "I would not be different in any way that others would notice," he said. "That is not what I asked either," she said. He met her eyes. "I would lose something I did not know I needed," he said, "until I had it." She held his gaze. She had a very good internal sense of when people were telling the truth, developed over years of working with people who had professional reasons to be imprecise about facts. He was telling the truth. "Your counsel wants severance," she said. "Yes. Because I am a liability." "Because you are unclassified," he said. "Because there is no precedent. Because the syndicate's visit was not accidental, and the council is aware that my north border has been falsified for 200 years, and that a civilian cartographer figured it out in 3 weeks, and the implications of that are still being assessed. And because it is easier," she said, "to sever something than to explain it." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She went to the chair across from his desk and sat down. She put her journal on her knee. She did not open it. "Item 7, she said. He said nothing. "You have been avoiding it for 3 days past your own deadline," she said. "I noticed. I did not say anything because I thought you were still working through it, but the threshold has a timer, and 24 hours is not very long, so I am going to need you to answer it now." He sat back in his chair. He looked at his hands for a moment. "I want," he said, "to stop making every decision based on what is politically defensible." He said it carefully, like a man who has not said a thing out loud before and is checking whether it survives contact with air. "I want to." He stopped. "I have been the Alpha King for 6 years, and before that I was the King's son, preparing to be the Alpha King, and I do not know what I want that is separate from what the position requires, because I stopped asking that question when I was 22, and my father put the crown on, and said, "Now you are what the territory needs." She looked at him. "I want to answer that question," he said. "That is what I want. I want the chance to answer it." She was quiet for a moment. "And you think the answer has something to do with the direction sense?" He looked at her. "I think," he said slowly, "that the direction sense is the first thing in 6 years that has felt like mine, that has not been given to me by a role, or a title, or a set of requirements." She thought about her own version of this, about a fire, and the specific silence that follows when everyone who knew your name is gone. About 3 years of making herself invisible on purpose, because visible had once meant a target, and the fear of being one again had been worth the loneliness. About falling asleep in the wrong carriage because she had been too tired to fight sleep anymore. "I understand that," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. They sat in the quiet of the study at 3 in the morning, with Sael very pointedly facing the wall in the corner, and the question between them taking up space the way important things do. "What do you want?" he said. She had not expected him to ask. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about a survey problem, not the first answer that came, but the accurate one. "I want the work," she said, "the real work. The archive, the records, the borders, the pattern I am finding. That is mine, and I want it." "Yes," he said. "And I want to stop planning my exit," she said. "I have been planning an exit since the morning after I arrived. Routes, timelines, what I would take with me. I do not want to be doing that anymore." He was very still. "Is that relevant to item 7? She said. "Yes," he said. "Then those are my answers," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire had burned lower. The window showed a sky that was starting, very faintly, to consider the idea of not being night. "The council meets at 9, he said. "I know," she said. "They will want a decision by then." "It is your decision," she said, "not theirs." He nodded slowly. "Yes." She stood. She picked up her journal. She looked at him one more time. "Item 7 is answered," she said, "on both sides." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said, "it is." She walked to the door. She stopped, because she had a habit of stopping. "Kaylin," she said. He looked at her. "The tower foundations," she said. "When I finish documenting the full pattern, the 200 years of falsification, it will implicate someone. Someone current, or someone who recently left office, or the syndicate directly. It will be politically difficult." "I know," he said. "I am going to finish documenting it," she said. "Regardless of everything else, I want you to know that." He held her gaze. "I know that too," he said. She left. In the corridor, she walked back toward her rooms through the quiet dark of the palace, with Sael beside her, matching her pace, steady and certain. She thought about 24 hours. She thought about decisions. She did not think about her exit routes. For the first time in 5 weeks, she did not think about her exit routes. She thought about the archive, about the 200 years of records still left to review, about the watchtower foundations and the real ridge and the 11 miles that had been hidden for longer than anyone currently alive had been keeping the secret. She thought about the north, and the cold, and the smell of pine and frost that came through the palace walls at night, and had, without her noticing when it happened, started to smell familiar. She thought about a man at a desk at 3 in the morning who had answered a question he had not answered in 6 years, and said it out loud in the way people do when they mean it to count. She went back to her room. She did not sleep again. She opened her journal and added a new item to the list. Item 23, stop planning the exit. She looked at it. She underlined it. She put the journal down and sat by the window and watched the sky change from black to the dark blue she had noticed, the first night, above the courtyard walls, and then from dark blue to the particular gray of a northern dawn. At 9 o'clock, in the great hall, the council met. She was not there for it. She found out afterward, from Hartley, who told her in the corridor outside the upper archive, with the directness of a man who has decided what side he is on. "The king accepted the bond," he said. She nodded. "The council is not. They are not pleased," he said, "but they are managed. He is very good at managing them," she said. "Yes," Hartley said. He paused. "The syndicate delegation left this morning, before the meeting." She looked at him. They knew what the decision would be. "It appears so," he said. She thought about the invisible court, about contacts and levers and 200 years of patient falsification. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He started to walk away. "Hartley," she said. He turned. "The tower foundations," she said. Would you be willing to take a field team to the eastern ridge? I need measurements and soil samples from the foundation sites. I can give you the exact coordinates. He looked at her for a moment. When? Whenever you can arrange it, she said. Within the week would be ideal. He nodded again. I will have a team ready by Friday. He left. She went into the upper archive. She opened the next bundle of records. She found the next layer of the pattern. She worked. Sael was under the table. The palace went about its day around her, and she went about hers, and at some point in the middle of the afternoon, without either of them having arranged it, Kalen appeared at the archive door. He looked at her. She looked at him. The direction sense between them was different now, fuller, less like background noise and more like a known frequency, clear and steady. The council meeting lasted 3 hours, he said. I heard, she said. They have agreed to classify you as royal cartographer, he said. On permanent appointment, subject to annual review. She looked at her notes. Not temporary assignment, she said. No, he said. Permanent. Yes. She looked up. You are going to need to have the personnel code amended. Civilian specialists on permanent appointment currently fall under a category that was designed for archivists and it will not properly apply to. I will have it amended, he said. She nodded. She wrote something in her journal. Lyra, he said. She looked up. He looked at her with the expression she had been watching develop over 5 weeks, the one that had started as careful containment and was becoming something else, steadily, the way a survey becomes accurate as more data points are added. Thank you, he said, for not planning the exit. She looked at him for a moment. I am still keeping the list, she said. I know, he said. Item 23 has an asterisk next to it. Does it? In case of revision, she said. He held her gaze. Understood, he said. He left. She went back to the records. Outside, the afternoon light moved across the upper archive windows in the particular way it did in the north. Lower angle, longer shadows, the kind of light that makes everything look like it has been here a long time and intends to stay. She had spent 15 years working in places that were not hers, mapping territories that belonged to someone else, correcting errors in records that she would hand back and walk away from. She picked up her pen. She made a correction. It was hers to make. The territorial survey was formally completed on the 43rd day of Lyra's presence in the palace. 43 days, 11 corrected maps, 6 recovered archive documents, 3 field verification trips, the last one with Hartley's team to the eastern ridge, where they had confirmed the foundation sites with measurements accurate to within 20 centimeters, and 1 very large bound volume that Lyra had spent the last 4 days compiling, indexed and cross-referenced, with 3 appendices and a notation system that she had developed specifically for this project, because the existing notation system had not been designed with 200-year falsification patterns in mind. She presented it to the full council on a Friday morning. She did not give a long introduction. She told them what the document contained, how she had verified the findings and what the historical pattern demonstrated. She used precise language. She did not editorialize. When she was finished, the council was quiet. Hartley spoke first. The syndicate's involvement goes back 7 generations, he said. The documented involvement, Lyra said. The pattern in the records is clear from approximately 200 years ago. Whether it goes further, I cannot determine from existing documents. And the current contacts, said one of the other council members, a woman named Patricia Holt who handled territorial security. Your document implies there are current contacts within the territory. My document identifies 11 archive entries in the last 15 years that follow the same pattern as the historical falsifications, Lyra said. They are consistent in method. I am not able to identify individual actors from document analysis alone. That requires a different kind of investigation. Which kind of investigation? Kalen said. He had been quiet throughout the presentation. He had read the full document the night before. She had given it to him at 10 in the evening, and he had returned it at 6 in the morning with 17 margin notes, all of them precise and useful, and one that simply said, "This is thorough." Correspondence records, Lyra said. Personnel movement, external financial flows. That is not my area. I can tell you what the surveys show. The rest is yours. Patricia Holt nodded. We will handle the investigation. There is one more thing, Lyra said. The room was attentive. The real border, she said. The eastern ridge. I have prepared revised territorial maps based on verified data. These will need to be formally recognized and adopted. The legal and political implications of amending the official border are above my level, But from a cartographic standpoint, the current maps are simply wrong, and they have been wrong long enough that correcting them will be, she paused, an adjustment. An adjustment, Kaylin said, and she caught the very slight edge of something that was not quite humor but was in that neighborhood. A significant adjustment, she said, without inflection, for certain parties. The council took the document. Patricia Holt's team began an internal investigation within the week. The process of formally amending the territorial border took considerably longer than any adjustment Lyra had managed in the archive, running through layers of historical treaty law and interterritorial agreements that required renegotiation with 4 neighboring regions. She was not involved in those negotiations. That was not her area. She went back to the archive. There was more to do. There was always more to do. The territorial records were deep enough that she could spend years in them and still be finding corrections. She was beginning to develop a secondary index, not just errors and falsifications but architectural records, old correspondence between pack councils, documents that no longer fit any existing category because the people who had created the categories had not anticipated their content. She was also, quietly and without official authorization, mapping the palace. Not the architectural plan, that was already handled by the palace construction office, though their records had 4 corridors missing and a complete misattribution of the old northern tower. She was mapping the invisible court. The flow of information, who sent documents where, who was informed before official communication, who showed up to events that they had not been formally invited to, and where they sat when they arrived. It was a different kind of cartography, but the underlying principles were the same. Everything has a pattern. Patterns can be found. What can be found can be understood. On the 45th day, Kaylin found her in the lower archive at midnight, which was becoming less remarkable than it once had been. The investigation has identified 6 current contacts, he said. She did not look up from the correspondence she was reading. How senior? 2 in the archive office, he said. 1 in supply logistics. 2 in the Border Patrol Administrative Division. 1. He paused. 1 who is more complicated. She looked up. My former head of intelligence, he said, who retired 14 months ago on excellent terms. She set down the correspondence. He was given access to exit documents. Yes, Kaylin said, which would have included the most recent survey summaries. Yes, he said. She thought about the timing. 14 months ago, the most recent survey would have covered the Eastern Ridge approach paths. If he passed those to the syndicate, then the syndicate knew about our patrol positioning before we did, he said. She nodded slowly. Have you sent for him? He is being located, he said. He sat down in the other archive chair, the one that had collected a coat, 2 of her pens, and an outdated survey index in the weeks since she had started treating it as a general storage location. He moved the coat. He looked at it. He put it over the back of the chair. She watched him do this. How are you? She said. He looked at her. She asked because she meant it, not as a transitional phrase. She had learned, over the weeks, that he answered direct questions better than ambient ones. That he needed the question to be real or he would answer the version of it that was manageable rather than the version that was true. I am managing something I did not anticipate, he said. A betrayal from a trusted person is different from a policy problem. It requires different resources. Yes, she said. He looked at the correspondence in front of her. What are you reading? Letters between the second-generation archive master and someone in the syndicate's eastern office, she said. From about 190 years ago. They are very polite letters. They discuss the weather frequently. And in between the weather? Instructions for how to describe the Eastern Ridge in survey documents, she said. In terms that would minimize its strategic value without being obviously inaccurate. He looked at the letters. 190 years of this. At least, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when you have finished the index, what do you want to do next? She looked up. What do you mean? You will finish the index, he said. What comes after? She had not thought about it, specifically. She had thought about the archive, and the records, and the next layer of the pattern. She had thought about the Eastern Ridge and the field verification work, and the 3 other territories, whose border records she now knew were almost certainly also affected, based on the syndicate's historical reach. She had not thought about after in any concrete sense. She said, there are 3 neighboring territories whose records should be reviewed with the same methodology, if the syndicate's falsification pattern extended beyond your border. Which it did, he said. Which it likely did, she said. Then there is a regional pattern to document. That is not a 2-month project. That is she calculated, 3 to 4 years, minimum. He looked at her. Here? The archive would need to coordinate with 3 external territories, she said, which requires formal agreements, which is above my level. I can arrange the formal agreements, he said. Yes, she said, you can. They looked at each other across the archive table. 3 to 4 years, he said. Minimum, she said. He nodded slowly. She looked at the letters. I want a proper laboratory in the upper archive, she said. The current lighting is inadequate for detailed document examination. I need a light table and proper magnification. You will have it, he said. And I want 2 assistants. Junior surveyors, not archivists. I will train them in the methodology. Agreed. And I want the notation system I developed for the current index to be formally adopted as the Palace Archive standard. He looked at her. Something moved behind his expression. Gordon Blake will not be pleased, he said. Gordon Blake was not pleased about the river correction either, she said. He adjusted. He did, Kalen said. And this time the thing that moved behind his expression made it fully to his face, not quite a smile, but close. Close enough that she catalogued it and added it to a different list, the one she did not write down. She picked up the next letter in the stack. He did not leave. She did not tell him to leave. They worked in the midnight quiet of the lower archive, in the kind of comfortable shared silence she had thought, for a long time, was not available to her. Outside, in the palace above, the invisible court went about its night business. The guards rotated, the torches burned. The northern wind moved through the old stone walls and came out the other side carrying that cold, familiar smell. At some point, she did not note the exact time, which was unlike her. He moved to read over her shoulder at one of the older letters, and then did not move back to his own chair. He stayed where he was, reading. She was aware of his presence in the way she was now always aware of it, the direction sense, the knowing, the bond awareness that had settled over the weeks into something so familiar she could not clearly remember what it had felt like before it was there. She kept reading. He kept reading. The archive clock marked the hours in its quiet way. She found the next layer of the pattern. She told him what she found. He asked a question. She answered it. This was, she thought, what 3 to 4 years felt like at the beginning. It felt like work. It felt like the best kind of work. The kind where the problem is real and the tools are good and the person next to you asks the right questions and waits for the right answers. It felt like the framework she had named it, the structure around which something else, something without a map, was continuing to fill in the space between the lines. She wrote it in her journal later, the note she always made at the end of a significant archive session, in her clean slanted handwriting. She wrote, Day 45, Lower Archive, Midnight Session. She wrote the archive notes. And at the bottom, below the professional record, she wrote one more line, the way she sometimes did when something needed to be said, but did not have a formal category. She wrote, The exit routes are still in the journal. She looked at that. She wrote, I have not looked at them in 30 days. She put the cap on her pen. She closed the journal. She went to sleep, in the room that was no longer quite a cell and no longer quite temporary, with Sael in front of the fire, and the cold northern wind in the walls, and the direction sense pointing, steady and certain, in the direction it had been pointing since the first threshold morning, and would point, she now knew, for a great deal longer than 90 days. The junior surveyors arrived on a cold morning in early winter, 2 of them, both fresh from the Territorial Institute. Their names were Will and Clara. Clara was from the Eastern Valleys, not far from where Lyra had grown up, and Will had studied historical cartography with a specialty in pre-institutional surveying methods, which Lyra found immediately useful. She met them in the upper archive and spent 2 hours asking them questions. She did not ask about their grades or their recommendations. She asked what they noticed first when they looked at a map they had not seen before. She asked what made them doubt a measurement. She asked what they did when they found a discrepancy between 2 sources that were both considered reliable. Clara said she always went to a third source. Will said he drew the discrepancy before he tried to resolve it, put it on paper, made it visible, looked at its shape. Lyra hired them both. One thing, she said, when the formal meeting was ending. In this archive, when you find something wrong, you say so directly. You do not soften it or suggest it or present it as a possible interpretation. If the data shows an error, you say there is an error. This is not discourteous. This is how corrections get made. Clara nodded. Yes, Miss Voss. Lyra, she said, we are not in an examination hall. Will nodded more slowly. What if the error is in a document signed by someone with authority? The signature does not change the geometry, Lyra said. The ridge is where it is regardless of who signed the map. He thought about this. Then he nodded. They started the following Monday. The weeks that followed had a shape that felt, for the first time in Lyra's professional life, sustainable. Not the grinding sustainability of someone outlasting something, but the productive sustainability of work that is properly resourced and properly done. Clara had a gift for the historical records, the ability to track a document through its chain of copies and identify where a transcription error had entered. Will was methodical with the measurement verification, the field check work that turned archive findings into physical confirmation. Lyra taught them the notation system. She taught them the pattern recognition she had developed over 6 weeks of immersion in the falsification record. She taught them how to read the secondary indicators, the linguistic habits, the specific phrasings that appeared consistently in documents touched by the syndicate's influence. They were good students. They asked good questions. Gordon Blake took to leaving them small notes with references, which was, Lyra had come to understand, his version of warmth. The palace's invisible court adjusted. It adjusts to everything, eventually, if the thing is present long enough and consistent enough and useful enough. Lyra had stopped noticing the assessments in people's eyes when she entered a room. She had started noticing, instead, the absence of them. Patricia Holt sent her a formal communication in the 6th week of the winter session. The internal investigation was complete. 2 of the 6 identified contacts had cooperated fully. The former intelligence head had provided documentation of the syndicate's regional reach that was, in Holt's precise words, substantially more comprehensive than anticipated. The syndicate's eastern withdrawal had been followed by a western one. The formal diplomatic consequences were going to take time. Lyra read the memo, filed it, and sent a note back with 2 questions about whether the correspondence recovered from the former intelligence head included any reference to the archive methodology, which would affect the secondary index timeline. It did. She adjusted the timeline. She told Will and Clara. They adjusted their workflow accordingly. This was how the work went. Kaylin came to the archive on Thursdays, not always for official reasons. Sometimes with documents, sometimes with questions about the regional survey program, which was now formally titled and had a small department to its name, sometimes for reasons that did not have a formal category, which she noticed but did not catalog in the professional record. On a Thursday in the 8th week of winter, he came in and sat down in the second chair and did not say anything for a few minutes. She kept working. This was not unusual. The Western Territories have made contact, he said. She looked up. They received the documentation from the syndicate investigation. They want to know if the methodology can be applied to their own records. She set down her pen. The Western Territories are not in the original 3 to 4 year scope. No, he said. If they are included. The timeline extends, he said. I know. She calculated. Significantly. How significantly? An additional 2 to 3 years, she said. Depending on the state of their archive. He looked at her. She looked at him. With the right team, she said, it could be managed without. The team is yours to determine, he said. She picked up her pen again. She wrote a note. I will need to assess the Western records before committing to a timeline. Of course, he said. And a field visit, she said. At least 1, possibly 2, depending on what the assessment shows. Arrangements can be made, he said. She wrote another note. She looked at what she had written. She added a line. This becomes a regional program, she said, not a single territory project. Yes, he said. That changes its scope significantly. Yes, he said. She set the pen down again. She looked at him. Why are you telling me before the council? She said. He met her eyes. Because you will know what to say to the council once I tell you what they are likely to object to, and I find that useful. That is an interesting use of the word useful, she said. The council is going to say the regional scope is an overreach, he said, that it exceeds the territory's formal responsibility to neighboring regions, that the resources required are not proportionate to the benefit. What they mean, she said, is that extending the program increases the territory's formal relationships with the Western regions in ways that have political implications. Yes, he said. And what you think about that, she said. I think the implications are favorable, he said, long term. The correct borders benefit everyone. She looked at the window. The winter light was thin and flat, the kind that makes everything look like a sketch. She thought about the ridge, about the watchtower foundations, about 200 years of someone's careful effort to keep people from knowing what was actually where. I will have a regional methodology proposal ready by the end of the week, she said, with a preliminary timeline and resource outline. Give that to the council first. Let them argue about the scope before the formal request from the Western Territories comes through officially. He looked at her. That is exactly the right sequence, he said. I know, she said. He almost smiled. The full version, not just the edge of it. She had been cataloging the evolution of that expression since the first month. It was one of the few things she had observed improving on a clear trajectory over time, which she found, unprofessionally, satisfying. There is something else, he said. She waited. The bond determination review, he said. The 90-day review is in 3 weeks. She had not forgotten. She had noted it in her journal, and then, deliberately, not returned to it, because the work was ongoing, and thinking about the review was not useful until it was necessary. Yes, she said. The council will formally review the arrangement, he said. The classification, the appointment, he paused. The other things. The bond, she said. Yes, he said. What is their current position? Varied, he said. Holt is in favor of continuation. She has cited the investigation outcomes as evidence of the arrangement's value. 3 others are in favor with conditions. 2 are still opposed. What are the conditions? Formalization, he said. They want the arrangement to have a formal category, not permanent appointment with an anomalous attachment, something with precedent. She looked at him. There is no precedent, she said. No, he said. So they want a new one created. Yes, he said. She thought about categories and classifications, about how the law dealt with things that did not fit existing frameworks by creating new frameworks, and how new frameworks were either adopted into the general record or remained as exceptions that applied only to one case. What kind of formalization? She said. He met her eyes. She held his gaze. A territorial recognition, he said, in the careful language of a man who has thought very precisely about what he is saying and what he is not saying. A formal role within the pack structure, not a courtesy title, a recognized position. She was quiet. That is a significant category, she said. Yes, he said. It would need to be explained, she said. To the council and the territory. Yes, he said. And it would be irreversible, she said. The bond is already irreversible, he said. The territorial recognition would simply reflect what is already true. She looked at the archive, at the notation index and the survey maps and the secondary program framework she had started 2 weeks ago, and the fresh stack of Western Territory documents that had arrived that morning. She thought about 3 to 4 years becoming 5 to 6. She thought about the North Tower and the Real Ridge, and a man who had said, I have not had occasion to answer that question recently, and then answered it. She thought about Sayel, who was under the table, and had been under the table since the first archive session, and showed no signs of ever being anywhere else. I have conditions, she said. He nodded. The notation system becomes the territorial standard, she said. Formally, not just the palace archive, the full territorial record. Done, he said. The regional program is formally separated from the territorial archive, she said. Its own department, its own funding designation, its own reporting structure. Done, he said. And I want the foundation records, she said. The Watchtower foundations, the pre-palace construction documents, the full building history, I want those transferred to the main archive and properly cataloged. They have been in the lower storage since the territory was founded, and nobody has indexed them. He looked at her. Something moved behind his expression. Those will take years to catalog, he said. Yes, she said, they will. He understood. She watched him understand. Done, he said. She nodded. She picked up her pen. I will have the regional methodology proposal ready by Friday, she said, with a note at the end about the territorial recognition and its implications for the Western partnerships. Thank you, he said. He stood. Kalen, she said. He stopped. She did not look up from the notes she was beginning to write. Item 23, she said. A pause. I know, he said. She wrote. He left. Sayel's tail moved once under the table. I heard you, she said, without looking down. He put his chin on her foot. She wrote the methodology proposal. She wrote it in one sitting, from the afternoon until the fire burned down and someone came and stoked it, and she wrote it in the clean, precise way she wrote everything, not because precision was all she had, but because precision was how she showed what she cared about. She wrote the conditions into the final paragraph, not as conditions but as framework, the territorial standard, the department structure, the foundation records, the shape of what she was agreeing to, what she was building. She sealed it. She put it in the courier folder for the morning. She closed her journal. She sat for a moment in the low light. Item 23, she thought. Not a reminder. A record. She had stopped planning the exit. She had stopped because the exit had stopped being a plan and become an abstraction, a theoretical direction she kept in the journal the way some people keep things in the back of a drawer that they never open but cannot quite bring themselves to remove. She would remove it when she was ready. She suspected she was almost ready. She stood. She packed her bag. She walked through the corridors of the palace, familiar now, hers in the way that things become yours not through title or law, but through the daily accumulation of small knowings, through the repetition of presence until the place and you are simply part of the same record. Sael walked beside her. The winter air in the corridors had the particular cold that old stone holds, the cold that is not damp but is dense, the cold that has been in the walls for centuries and has no interest in being anything else. She walked through it. She was warm. The territorial recognition ceremony was, at Lyra's request, not a ceremony. It was a formal signing, conducted in the council chamber on a Tuesday morning, with 7 council members present, Hartley as witness, and Sael sitting at the front of the room in a way that the chamber had not been designed to accommodate, and managed with considerable dignity regardless. The document was 4 pages. Lyra had reviewed it 3 times, noted 2 amendments to the language, and signed it on the 4th review after the amendments were incorporated. Kaelin signed it on the same reading. That was it. The council signed as witnesses. Gordon Blake had been invited, she had invited him, and he signed as archive representative, with the particular expression of a man who had started this story thinking one thing, and found himself somewhere entirely different and was, slowly, finding that he preferred it here. Patricia Holt shook Lyra's hand and said, with the economy of someone who does not waste words, the territory is better for the correction. Hartley said nothing. He nodded at her in the way he had been nodding for months, the professional recognition nod, and then added, very briefly, something that was slightly different, a nod that was not quite professional and not quite personal but lived precisely in the space between. She understood. They went back to their work. Will and Clara had the Western Territory Assessment Framework ready by noon. Lyra reviewed it, made 4 notes, and sent them to refine the 3rd section, which was solid in its methodology but imprecise in its scope language. She spent the afternoon on the foundation records. The pre-palace construction documents were older than anything else in the archive. They had been stored in the lower level, below the lower archive, in boxes that were not properly labeled, and in some cases not labeled at all. She had known they were there for 2 months. She had been waiting for the right time to begin. The right time was now. She went down with a lamp and her notebook and a pair of conservation gloves, and she began. The first box contained construction contracts from before the current palace was built. The second contained original boundary surveys, actual boundary surveys, not falsified ones, the real measurements taken when the territory was first formally established. She opened the 3rd box. She stopped. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had done its job remarkably well for however long it had been sitting in a basement, was a survey map. She recognized the style immediately. The measurement notation, the annotation system, the specific way of handling terrain features, it was the same system she had been seeing in the falsification records, but earlier, much earlier. This was the original, the accurate one, the map that preceded the falsification. She sat back on her heels. She looked at the map. She looked at the eastern ridge, clearly marked, in exactly the position she had verified. The watchtower foundations were on it, each one numbered in a sequence that told her there had originally been 7. Not the 6 she had found physical evidence for. The 7th had not been excavated. She made a note. She made another note. She kept making notes until the lamp oil was low and she had to come back up. She came into the upper archive and Will looked at her expression and said, carefully, "What did you find?" "The original," she said. He looked at her. "The original survey," she said, "before any of it started. 200 years before the falsification record begins. There was an accurate map. Someone preserved it." He sat forward. "In the foundation archive?" "In the 3rd box," she said. "In oilcloth." Clara had turned around. "Who preserved it?" Lyra looked at her notes. She had not examined the oilcloth carefully in the basement. She would need to tomorrow, in proper light with proper tools. "I do not know yet," she said. "But someone wrapped it very carefully, and put it somewhere they expected it to survive, which means they expected the accurate record to become necessary again eventually." She looked at the notes. She thought about 200 years. "Someone," she said, "knew what was being done, and made sure there would be evidence when it was time to correct it. The archive was quiet for a moment. "That is a strange comfort," Clara said. "Yes," Lyra said. "It is." She sent a note to Kaylin that evening. It said, "Found the original in the Foundation archive. Full review underway. 7th Watchtower site requires field verification. Timeline for the Western program unchanged." She paused. She added, "The Foundation records are going to take longer than I estimated, possibly significantly longer." She paused again. She added one more line. "This is not a problem." She sealed it. She gave it to the courier. She went back to the archive. Sael was lying in the corridor outside, because he had learned weeks ago that the lower level was not accessible to him, and had adapted by positioning himself at the top of the stairs instead, a compromise between the desire to follow her and the practical limits of his size. She sat on the stairs beside him for a moment. "7th site," she said. "That will be interesting." He pressed his flank against her knee. "I know," she said. "I am not going alone. I have an entire department." He exhaled. "And Hartley has been asking for a field assignment," she said. "He finds the archive frustrating." Another exhale, more pointed. "You could come to the field verification," she said. "There is no rule against it." He turned his head and looked at her. "That was not meant as a dare," she said. He looked back at the corridor. "Fine," she said. "You can come." She stood. She went back into the archive. The lamp was fresh. The conservation gloves were still on. The second box of pre-palace documents was open and waiting. She picked up where she had left off. The Foundation records opened around her like a landscape that had been patient, the way old things are patient, the way things that have been waiting a long time have learned to simply wait, because they know, in whatever way places and documents know things, that eventually someone will come down the stairs with a lamp and the right questions. She turned the next page. She found the next thing. She kept going. On a bright morning in late spring, the territorial map was changed. The formal change had taken months. There had been diplomatic communication and treaty amendments and a commission and a review process that Lyra had been involved in at the technical level and entirely uninvolved in at the political level, which was precisely how she had arranged it. The new map was printed by the Territorial Registry, the official version, stamped and distributed to every provincial office and border post and archive in the Northern Pact territories. It showed the Eastern Ridge correctly. It showed the Watchtower foundations, all 7 of them, including the 7th, which Hartley's extended field team had located in early spring in exactly the position Lyra had calculated from the original survey. It showed a border that was 11 miles east of where it had been. It was the first time in 200 years that the official map had been correct. Lyra received a copy in the archive. She opened it on the table and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it in the main case with the amendment documents and the Foundation archive survey and the notation index and everything else that belonged together. She closed the case. She went back to work. The Western Territory assessment had produced 14 major findings, 7 of which required field verification, and Clara had returned from the first field trip with 3 additional discrepancies that had not appeared in the archive review, which was normal. Field work always surfaced things that the documents did not capture, and Lyra was in the middle of integrating those findings into the revised methodology when the door opened. She did not look up. "If it is the council memo about the commission report, tell them I will respond by Friday." "It is not the council memo," Kaylin said. She looked up. He was holding a copy of the new map. She looked at it. She looked at him. "The Territorial Registry sent it this morning," he said. "I know," she said. "I received mine this morning too." He came to the table. He set the map down beside her notes. He looked at it, not for the first time, she knew. He had seen the proofs before they went to print. But looking at the official version was different from looking at a proof. "It is correct," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at it for a moment. "You know what it means for the territory," he said. "The military implications, the supply chain adjustments, the renegotiated patrol routes." "Yes," she said. "And you know what it means beyond that," he said. She looked at him. "You are going to have to be more specific." He met her eyes. "It means the falsification failed," he said. 200 years of careful, patient, deliberate effort, and it failed. Because the original survived. Because someone preserved it. And because you found it." She looked at the map. "The original survived because someone preserved it," she said. "That person matters as much as anything I did." "We do not know who it was," he said. "No," she said, "but whoever they were, they expected the correction to be possible. They believed it was worth waiting for. She looked at the archive case, at the foundation documents inside it, the original survey in its oilcloth, patient and accurate and waiting for the right person to come down the stairs with a lamp. It was worth waiting for, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Clara's second field report came through. I know, she said. I read it this morning. The southern boundary findings are more complex than the preliminary assessment indicated. What does that mean for the timeline? It means it extends, she said, probably by 4 months. Is that a problem? She looked at him. No, she said. He nodded. She went back to the integration notes. He did not leave. He looked at the map for another moment. Lyra, he said. She set the pen down. He was looking at the eastern ridge on the map, at the correctly placed line of the real boundary. At the small marking that indicated the watchtower sites, all 7 of them. Thank you, he said. She had heard him say this before. It had sounded different before, formal, official, the courtesy of a king acknowledging useful work. It did not sound like that now. She did not say you are welcome, because that was not the right response. She said, the 7th site needs a proper historical survey, not just field verification, a complete assessment of the foundation, the construction period, what was there and when. That is not my methodology, but I have contacts at the Provincial Historical Institute who could. Yes, he said. It should be its own project, she said, separate from the regional program. Yes, he said, with its own timeline and its own documentation standard. I will arrange it, he said. She nodded. She picked up her pen. The original survey, she said, without looking up. The one in the oilcloth. I want it formally accessioned into the main archive collection, not as a working document, as a historical record. Done, he said. With full conservation treatment, she said, and a proper case. Done, he said. She wrote a note. She looked at what she had written. She looked up. He was watching her with the expression she had been cataloging since the first month, the one that had started as careful containment and become something fuller, something that was not trying to be anything other than what it was. She thought about preserved things, about patient things, about the quality of waiting that is not passive but active, the waiting that is choosing to hold something until the right moment, because the right moment exists and it is worth believing in. She thought about a sealed carriage and a wrong direction, and a woman who had been too tired to fight sleep, and what had come of it. She thought about sail, 1 pace to her left, always. She thought about the direction sense, pointing, steady and certain, in the direction it had pointed since the threshold morning. The foundation documents, she said, the remaining boxes. I estimate 6 months to fully catalog them. Longer, he said, probably. Probably, she agreed. But necessary, he said. Yes, she said. It is necessary. She looked at the map one more time. At the correct ridge, the real boundary, the true shape of things. She went back to work. Outside, the spring light moved through the archive windows in the long way of northern spring, where the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look considered. The map lay on the table beside her notes, correct and official and real. Sael exhaled under the table. The pen moved. The archive held its record. And the correct line ran where it had always run, through territory that had known its own shape all along, waiting only to be found and named and given back to the map, which was, in the end, what corrections were for. Not to change things, to reveal what was already true.